IVM.
Hi, I'm Satyajit.
Hi, I'm Racheta.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project.
We have as our guest today Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee, one of India's leading CEOs, coach and expert mythologist with a mission to share India's ancient wisdom. In this episode, we deep dive into the complete book of yoga by Swami Vivekananda.
In the second half, we also discuss Man's Search for Meaning by Victor Frankl, The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra, and The Land of Seven Rivers by Sanjeev Sanyal.
Eika discusses the 4 different types of yoga, the similarities between religion and quantum physics, mythology, logotherapy and paradoxical intention, among other things.
Happy listening.
Once in Western India, I was travelling in the desert country on the coast of the Indian Ocean. For days and days, I used to travel on foot through the desert. But it was to my surprise that I saw every day beautiful lakes with trees all around them and the shadows of the trees upside down and vibrating there. How wonderful it looks. And they call this a desert country? I said to myself. Nearly a month I travelled, seeing these wonderful lakes and trees and plants. One day I was very thirsty and wanted to have a drink of water. So I started to go to one of these clear, beautiful lakes. And as I approached, it vanished. And then with a flash, it came to my brain. This is the mirage about which I have read all my life. And with that came also the idea that throughout the whole of this month, every day, I had been seeing the mirage and did not know it. The next morning I began my march. There was again the lake, but with it also the idea that it was the mirage and not a true lake. So is it with this universe. We are all travelling in this mirage of the world day after day, month after month, year after year, not knowing that it is a mirage. One day, it will break up, but it will come back again. The body has to remain under the power of the past karma, and so the mirage will come back. The world will come back upon us as long as we are bound by karma. Men, women, animals, plants, our attachments and duties, all will come back to us, but not with the same power. Under the influence of the new knowledge, the strength of karma will be broken, its poison will be lost. It becomes transformed, for along with it there comes the idea that we know it now, that the sharp distinction between the reality and the mirage has been known.
Thank you, Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee. That was an excerpt from the book, The Complete Book of Yoga by Swami Vivekananda. We'll be right back after this to discuss the book in further detail.
You say jogging, and I'm telling you a story about a man who dated 3 sisters. You say boss, Kurla, and it's about a guy who went out to a party where they were selling beef. This is Anand Sivkumaran, aka The Croc. My show, The Croc's Tales. You give me a word, I'll tell you a story. Words aapke, kahani aapke liye. Do tune in on Monday and Thursday on the IVM website, app, and anywhere you get your podcast from.
Welcome to Paperback by the Open Library Project. I am your co-host Satyajit, otherwise known as Onion Knight in most food circles. I'm hosting this podcast with my co-founder at the Open Library Project, Racheta Sharma.
Hi, I'm Racheta. I'm an ex-banker who gave up my banking profession to follow my passion and run libraries across the world. The Open Library Project is a non-fiction book library service offered to businesses on a subscription basis. We're trying to move away from the run-of-the-mill library concept by setting up locational and rotational curated libraries at co-working spaces, corporates and business incubators. The idea is to create value, build a knowledge community and encourage a growth mindset amongst our members.
Today we have with us on the show Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee. Eika is one of India's leading women CEOs, an accomplished executive coach, an Oxford Chevening scholar, and most interestingly, an expert mythologist with the mission of sharing India's ancient wisdom with the world. Welcome to the show, Eika.
Hi Satyajit, thank you Racheta.
Have you here.
It's lovely to have you here, seriously.
And I must confess the coffee here is really nice. Thank you for that too.
Thank you, IVM.
Thank you, IVM. So
Right.
great.
Yeah, so a very, very interesting choice of books. And the complete book of yoga is supposed to be like a Bible for spirituality. So tell us what really stands out for you in this book.
Tell me, what do you really understand when somebody says yoga?
My limited understanding would be the practice of the actual practice of yoga and the sort of mindfulness that comes with it.
Yes,
is what my limited understanding of it is.
And that's actually quite deep. That's more than what most people know about yoga.
Yeah,
Racheta, what about you?
I think it. So to me, yoga comes equates to meditation, and yoga is also there are various karma yoga and a lot of yogas that I've heard about. I have very limited knowledge of, but so I think it has to do with that as well.
So here's where it gets very interesting. Yoga is a philosophy. So so across our ancient scriptures and texts, there are these various philosophies that guide life. So the 6 primary philosophies, and you would have heard these words being thrown about. So there's Sankhya, Sankhya philosophy, there's Dvaita, there is Mimamsa, there is Nyaya, there's Vaiveshika. Yoga is one of those philosophies.
Okay.
And really what all that it means is that you have the choice to pick up and live by any philosophy that you want.
Okay.
Now, the challenge that happens in most of our ancient scriptures and really putting that knowledge out there is that it is written in a language that we no longer understand very well.
Okay.
Right.
So when you hear the word resistance, the word resistance in English has a very different meaning from the word resistance in physics.
Right.
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 Yeah.
Or current or revolution.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? So think of the fact that the way all our ancient scriptures are written, which is the language of Sanskrit, have multiple layers in them.
Okay.
The words just mean something very different in Sanskrit. Or when you start, the way the language is organized, the way you start uncoding them, they're very different from the way they are in Sanskrit and the way they are in English.
Okay.
So if I was to take the example of the first richa of the Rig Veda, right? It talks about horses, it talks about cows, it talks about sunlight, it talks about dawn, and it talks about wheels. And you're wondering, where is the profound knowledge in this?
Right.
What is the relation?
And what is the relation?
Yeah.
Except at the moment you go beyond the roots of those words, you realize that the root for the word cow and the root for the word knowledge is the same.
Okay.
Ashva is the word for horse
Yeah.
and for energy.
Okay.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
Surya is of course the sun, but it's also light. And so, thus when you start decoding the various layers, that's when you realize that first richa actually translates into saying open your mind and activate your energy. And really that's all that it means.
Okay.
Right? So that's why when I was, and of course I've been reading a fair number of texts for about over a decade and a half now, and I was struggling because I wasn't finding that one simple source text. Of course, I can spend multiple lifetimes reading the Vedas, but it would take multiple lifetimes.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's when I found the Swami.
Okay.
And, being married into a Bengali household for almost 20 years, I am now kicking myself for not having found him earlier.
Right.
But that's how I stumbled upon the complete book of yoga. And again, Racheta, you're absolutely right. So yoga as a philosophy is not just the asana that you see people doing or the contortionist in the contortion of the Shirshasana and,
Right.
Matsyendra asana or what.
Shavasana. I love it.
Yeah. So yoga is a philosophy beyond that.
Yeah.
It's the way we live our life. And the Swami talks about the 4 kinds of yogas, Racheta, like you mentioned. So there's the Bhakti Yoga, there's the Karma Yoga, there's the Jnana Yoga, and there's the Raja Yoga. The Bhakti Yoga is about it's about the way we lead our lives.
Okay.
So to achieve peace of mind, to achieve nirvana, to lead your life in a particular way, you don't necessarily have to force yourself into a practice of any sort. Do what comes most naturally to you.
Okay.
So, you could be a karma yogi. A karma yogi is one who fulfills all their worldly duties.
Okay.
They thrive and live in karma. So the Bhagavad Gita is actually about Krishna exhorting Arjun
Right.
to do his karma.
That's
so when Arjun says,
In the Mahabharata.
correct.
Right.
So Arjun says, look, I can't fight. And he says, it is your karma
It is
to
your
fight.
Yeah.
Duty to...
Absolutely. So the karma yoga is about anybody who practices and fulfills their daily duties, their jobs, derives worship and meaning out of their work. That's karma yoga for you.
Okay.
Right? Then you have Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga is a very emotional form of yoga. It operates in absolute surrender.
Okay.
Okay.
So I surrender to a higher power. I love completely and deeply. I fulfill myself emotionally centered.
Okay.
And that's Bhakti Yoga.
Okay.
So the entire, the whole derivative of Sufism, a lot of religious cults that you see around, a lot of groups, Mira with Krishna and surrender. So Bhakti Yoga is also one path to salvation.
Okay.
Okay.
Then you have Jnana Yoga, which is if you're the intellectual,
Right.
and you must know. And he explains it brilliantly. The Swami explains it so beautifully, where he says that there's the universe, and then there's the time, the space, and then there's the consciousness. And beyond that is the absolute.
Okay.
So we exist in our daily time-space
Right.
conundrums
Right.
in this universe, and then our purpose is to move into the absolute.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's a whole conversation around saying, but if you are the absolute, then how will you know it?
Right.
You know, pretty much what the extract that I read out just
Yeah,
now. So
yeah.
if you know that
The
it is a mirage,
Yeah.
How will you know?
then you're already in the absolute.
Right.
So then you know that what you've been seeing all this while is an illusion,
mirage.
is a perception, is how your mind has explained things to you.
Yeah.
But beyond that, for instance, in the passage that I read out,
Right.
there really is just the desert.
Right.
And more such. In fact, he explains the wave particle duality so brilliantly in the as part of the Jnana Yoga, and you wouldn't think they're correlated.
Right. Right.
Oh, but that we'll definitely
We'll get to it, I
yes,
think,
we
in another
must.
book in
We
the second
must.
half.
We must.
So that's actually very surprising that Swamiji does mention wave particle duality and also interconnectedness of, I guess, spirituality and science at some
Science,
point.
And that last one, which I must tell you, Satyajit, because that's the one that you were talking about. So Raja Yoga
Right.
is the yoga of the discipline. So when you hear
Okay.
about the Eightfold Path and you hear
Right.
about the Yama, Niyama,
Right.
Asan, Pranayam,
Yeah.
Dharana, Pratyahara, Dhyana, Samadhi, that's the Eightfold Path to Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is about controlling your will.
Okay.
Now, here's where I must mention this, that when I read out the passage to you, almost all of this book, so even while the Swami's version of the text is by far the most readable version, it still doesn't speak the language that
would
we consume today.
Okay.
Right.
Right? It's still difficult to figure out, so what, I mean, main kya karun? Where do I go from here
Yeah.
on this, right?
Yeah.
So in fact, I must mention about this. So inspired from the Swami, and that's a part of my journey of life. And that's when Siddharth and I set up this 52 red pills last year,
Okay.
which was a weekly exercise. So weekly exercise of life hacks, finding life hacks,
Okay.
being the ever learner. So every week we would pick up a topic.
Right.
And on that topic, we would do our research, meet experts, and read up.
Oh, nice.
And I would bring in a lot of ancient wisdom into it. Siddharth would find out, try and experience it, experiment with it. And then we would publish a red pill at the end of every week. And our first one was on sleep last year.
Okay.
So when we started with the red pill, and it turned out that Ariana Huffington was in town at that time.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
So, and she was, that was the time that she was launching Thrive and Thrive Global and the whole idea of sleep.
Yeah.
So that week, we actually learned about sleep from Ariana and,
wow.
and how the West was consuming it. And then I went back and figured out sleep for us from the ancient texts.
Yeah.
And of course, I went back to the Swami because I always do that. And the whole relationship was so wonderful, right? How we know it in our daily practices is just one part of it. It's like how, Satyajit, you know of yoga through the Raja Yoga.
Right.
Or at least the practice of Raja Yoga, right? Rajeta, you know of yoga. Theoretically, to say there are four pieces of yoga, or four kinds of yoga.
Right.
But the understanding of knowing that actually yoga is a philosophy, it's a way of life. It is a road to salvation. If you can
Whatever
just,
path you choose.
if you can just crack any one of these,
Yeah.
you are a yogi. If you do your daily jobs well, you're a yogi.
Yeah.
If you operate in complete surrender and absolutely through your emotions, you're a yogi. If you live in knowledge and wisdom, you're a yogi. If you do your 8 disciplines, you're a yogi.
Yeah.
And doesn't matter which one of these you do, you will still achieve salvation. You will still live in knowledge, purity and wisdom.
And it's like, you're choosing your responsibilities, or you're surrendering and submitting to something, or you're, using knowledge, wisdom. So definitely there is one or the other path that you can choose to salvation.
And this, by the way, again, we'll be talking about in a very different context in the second half.
Right, in the second half of the... So
who would you recommend this book to? Everybody, I'm guessing, but...
No, actually that's a good question. Because, in fact, like I was talking about the red pills, and there is also a platform that I run today called Mythopia, where there is a lot of search for knowledge.
Okay.
A lot of people really want us to know more. So, very often I'll get a text like, okay, what's the best version of Shiv Puran to read? Or what's a distilled version of the Bhagavad Gita? Where can I find versions of, maybe the Kena Upanishad, whatever the case may be. So for anybody who's seeking to know more about the whole concept of yoga,
okay,
this is the book to go to.
Okay.
Great.
It must not, I would highly, so if you have no orientation or introduction to Indian wisdom at all, it might seem very, very dense. So every time that I have to explain this to my daughters, I have to read the text out to them, and then
explain it,
translate it in their language, and then tell them. That language can be physics, that language can be English, that language can be philosophy, that language can be just common sense, or psychology. So I'd recommend this for anybody who has the slightest interest in finding out about either Swami Vivekananda or finding out about the philosophy of yoga, or just interest in the larger, deeper ancient wisdom. This is a brilliant toe dip into that as well.
Great.
So before we go into a break, which path are you choosing from these? Do tell us that.
Rachita, it's not a choice you exercise. It is who you become with this.
Okay.
And it's interesting you ask, right? So both my parents are yogis.
Okay.
And my father is a Bhakti Yogi. So he operates in absolute surrender.
Okay.
My mother is, I think, the Karma Yogi. Though she's a writer, so you naturally think she's a Jnana Yogi.
Jnana Yogi, yeah.
But she's actually a Karma Yogi. She believes in doing, putting it out there. She will constantly be writing, doing, action oriented.
And then doing for her children and her husband. And lots of doing.
Lots of doing.
Lots
of doing. I think my husband's also, the Karma Yogi. He's also perpetually and forever doing. Interestingly, my sister is the Bhakti Yogi. So, but her Bhakti is not towards, the Vedic practices at all. She's actually a practicing Buddhist.
Okay.
And that's fine. That's her Bhakti.
That's her Bhakti.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it's coming from. It doesn't matter who you're surrendering to, as long you live in being centered in your surrender. I think I am the Jnana Yogi.
Okay.
But I still have a long way to go. Yeah.
That's, this is a difficult one. Like, you go tell someone, I think I'm a Jnana Yogi, they'll be like, oh, you know too much. But I get why you are hesitating.
I think it's the quest.
Yeah.
So the way I operate through something.
That's what drives you, basically, knowledge.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Great.
On that note, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another week on the IVM Podcast Network. As always, it's an awesome week. We'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this month as well, Savari, Storytel, and Paytm Money. Just a reminder, we're hiring some people. We're looking for producers, content creators, audio engineers, developers. Check out our careers page on our website. And if you're interested in working at the most awesome place in the world, please do send us your application. We have a few new shows launching. So the first new show we got launching is called Mr. and Mrs Binge Watch. It's hosted by Janice Sequeira and Anirudh Goa. They're a TV-crazy, Netflix-loving, binge-watching couple who snort television for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They talk about the shows they binge on and a whole lot more. New episodes are out every Thursday on our network. Another new show we have is called Edges and Sledges. It's a cricket podcast where Varun, Ashwin, and DJ talk all about cricket. This week they have Tatenda Taibu, the former Zimbabwe captain, as their guest. It's the ICC World Cup season, so definitely check this one out. On Cyrus Says, Rohit P-Man Pereira and Kripa Goyal, hosts of the ATKT Talent Tent podcast, talk to Cyrus about tattoos, Catholic school plays, young adult fiction, and their new podcast. Also check out the Cock and Bull edition of Cyrus Says from last week, where Vivek Kaul joined Cyrus, me, and Abbas to make sense of the election results. On the Pragati podcast, Narayan Ramachandran, co-founder of the Takshashila Institute, joins Pawan to talk about the NDA's agenda for the next 5 years. On Croc Tales, Anand Sivakumaran narrates a tale on spicing things up between Rahul and Shreya. How can a couple spice it up? Find out with Chief Croc. On our Kannada podcast, Thalle Harate, Vijayendra Rao talks to Pawan Srinath and Ganesh Chakravarti about India's Gram Sabhas, one of India's biggest democratic successes since independence. On Simplified, Chuck and Naren go back in time and talk about moments when human activity influenced a change on the Earth's geology and ecosystems. On Equity Sahiye, brought to you by Motilal Oswal, Shrey Lunkar joins Anupam to discuss the Indian automobile sector. On Know Your Kanun, Amber Rana gets into the details of defamation and its exceptions under the law. On What a Player, Siddharth and Mikhail are previewing the ICC Cricket World Cup 2019 along with their predictions. And with that, let's go on with your show.
Welcome back, guys. We still have with us Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee, and we're going to talk about a few more books. First book that we're going to talk about is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So, keeping with the theme of, the book we were talking about earlier, I think this is a good segue to continue the conversation on spirituality and purpose. And so, tell us a little bit about this book, Eika.
So, why Man's Search for Meaning is especially meaningful is because Viktor Frankl was one of the Auschwitz prisoners.
Okay.
And he lived in his life in the Nazi prison, in the concentration camps.
Right.
He was a psychologist by training, and he survived the concentration camps.
Okay.
So when you read the book, it's very hard to believe that somebody found or was able to sustain himself on finding meaning. Even in a dark, bleak scenario like that. And he often said that. So he actually starts the book by sharing the fact that most people died for lack of meaning because they'd given up hope. They didn't die. I mean, of course, the physical torture caught up with them at some point of time or the other. Yeah. But they actually died because they'd given up hope. And he mentions this very interesting incident of saying that at some point of time, the capos, the best prisoners who beat up all the other prisoners, were made their guardians. So they were called the capos.
Okay.
And the capos, they would be allotted 12 cigarettes.
Okay.
Each prisoner would be allotted 12 cigarettes if they did their job well. Now, the 12 cigarettes in themselves weren't of any use, but the joy of the 12 cigarettes was that they could trade these 12 cigarettes with the capo for soup, 12 cups of soup, and that was important.
Yeah.
Okay.
So normally people never smoked their own cigarettes, and you knew that if you found a prisoner smoking his own ration of cigarettes, he'd given up hope.
Wow.
And that's how he starts the book, about explaining this.
Nice.
And then he goes on to talk about the fact that, and he's very inspired also by the words of Nietzsche. And Nietzsche says that he who has a why for life can beat any how
Right.
to live.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is about finding your meaning and your purpose. This is about saying, it's a book that I think must be read by any young, actually anybody who's either an adolescent or is just arriving into the workplace, or anybody who's looking or is being very unhappy with life. This is the book to read. This is the book to figure out what your purpose in life is.
I guess it kind of gives like a real extreme context on how bad things could have possibly been for you if you were in that situation, and then maybe how we are living right now is so
gratitude, yes, is one part of life, but the other, so it's not a book full of pathos.
Okay.
And that is the joy of this book.
Okay.
And then how he goes on to explain how you find your meaning.
Yeah.
So Frankl always says that there are 3 places that you can find your meaning in. And everyone has a meaning, you just need to find it. You can find your meaning in work.
Yeah.
So the cause that you live for. You can find your meaning in love. And here I go back to Vivekananda talking about Bhakti. That you can actually find your meaning in just loving somebody and caring for them.
Right.
Our challenge is that we very often confuse that with a transactional relationship of saying that, look, if I love you, you must love me back. Look at how much I do for you.
Right.
But that's not meaningful love. Meaning in love is literally like we're saying, Meera and Krishna.
Completely. Right.
I love you. I surrender to you entirely.
It's like devotion.
Or a husband to a wife. So frankly, Victor Frankl was deeply in love with his wife. And he says what kept him going was the thought that he will see his wife at the end of this journey and that he will take care of her for the rest of their lives.
Oh, wow.
And the third place that you find your purpose in is courage in difficult times. So sometimes you think there is a burden that you live with, and that burden becomes your purpose. So somebody who looks after their mother does it as a sense of duty. But sometimes you'll find that also becomes their purpose for existence. They live, and this is not love, it's a sense of duty.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Courage in difficult times is also how soldiers find their meaning and purpose. Right? So these are three ways that you find your purpose.
That's
And
beautiful.
it's gorgeous how he explains it.
This book also talks about paradoxical intention, right? So if you can throw some light on that.
So
Because I think that's beautiful, actually. It's like,
It's
but yeah,
paradoxical
why don't you
in
start?
its nature itself, I guess.
Yeah.
So I will explain that by going back to Swami Vivekananda on this.
Okay.
Right. We read out that little extract which spoke about knowing the illusion
Right.
Yeah.
and knowing your desert.
Yeah.
Right. Just the fact that the mirage is an illusion makes the reality of the desert so much more acceptable. You shift. It's a shift of perspective.
Okay.
And I find that paradoxical intention plays out in very similar a manner
Okay.
of saying that once I've found my purpose or my meaning, it becomes so much easier then for everything else to then fall in place. Your daily life then becomes living your intent and meaning. But there's always so you're living for the day,
Yeah.
but with the knowledge or with the conviction that's of the future.
Yeah, that's great, actually. And, so the Open Library project is also based on Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, which is also about the why
Yes.
of your business. So,
Yes.
We've deeply incorporated it into our ethos, So like what you're saying right now,
Yeah, it's
for us,
totally
it's
relatable.
like the daily
Yeah.
challenges for us are so enjoyable because we are looking forward to a much greater purpose,
We must actually get together sometime later whenever we find time
Yes.
on the Vedic version of Simon Sinek's.
Oh, great!
Golden
That
Circle.
would be
yeah,
that
that
would be
would be
fantastic.
big.
It's called the self-source model. It's something that I've been working on almost for about 10-12 years now.
Okay.
And it's brilliant in the way it explains how you break through your fears and insecurities and shine through in absolute resonance.
Wow.
It sounds fascinating. We have to have this
Yes.
conversation. So we are going to have you back on a second episode to have
Yeah.
this conversation
In
for sure.
detail.
But so the next book that we're moving on to is the Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra. Did I say that right?
Yes, Fritjof Capra.
Fritjof Capra. So the Tao of Physics is fascinating book. Yeah, I mean, really encompasses a lot of the things that I think. There's been a lot of enlightenment around science also in the general masses over the last maybe 10-20 years where we kind of have an understanding of maybe what is going on at the quantum. No one has a real understanding except the physicists or whatever, right? But so the Tao of Physics is this interesting book that kind of talks about the intersection between science and physics.
Yes.
Between spirituality and science.
Yes.
Which,
Yeah, it's basically your rational versus your intuitive knowledge.
Right.
Right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Okay. So please do explain.
So, the quest of 20th century science
Okay.
was the quest of what they used to call the grand unification theory. So just as you have the Newtonian physics, which
Right.
explains matter and how matter works and every reaction has an opposite reaction, etc., they don't have a unified theory of energy. Logically, if sound is also energy, light is also energy, and heat is also energy, then you should have a common set of rules that apply.
Right.
And that was the quest of 20th century science. Having said that, they did have the two concepts that have dominated the 20th century science are of quantum theory and of relativity.
Right.
Right. Now, why this is also interesting is because as you go deeper into quantum, as you went... So, when the universe was created, there were only two quantities that got generated. Energy and matter.
Right.
Physics was the laws of energy and matter. Chemistry was how energy and matter related with each other. And biology is more complex interactions of energy and matter, including rusting, oxidation, half-life, death, aging, etc., etc. We cracked, or we think we cracked, that part of our understanding of nature enough to break down your biology into physics, bio, and chemistry.
Okay.
So when we measure your digestion, we measure your metabolic rate. We measure how much of starch is broken down into how much of glucose. We measure protein into amino acids.
Yeah.
We measure respiration. We measure your rate of oxidation. Even when we measure your brain activity, mental activity, we measure the amount of electrical throughput. Right? But beyond that, the conversations go into the realm of spirit of consciousness conversations. They become hocus pocus.
Right.
They become religious and cult conversations, right?
Yeah.
So ye to tha when we were moving upwards in the evolutionary ladder. But surprise, surprise. As you went deeper down physics and went deeper into understanding matter, the less matter behaved like matter, the more it behaved like energy. You ended up with nano, you ended up with Heisenberg and his clouds and theory of uncertainty. You didn't know whether something behaved like a particle or a wave, etc., etc. You still went deeper because wise, intelligent human beings. And you went deeper into matter, so much so that your last frontier of matter, beyond which you couldn't go, is called the God particle. The Higgs boson.
Higgs boson particle, yeah.
And even at the Higgs boson, you realized that there was more space and less matter. So now, scientists were sitting there with this strange phenomenon where at the end, at the most basic, deepest, minutest, quantumest, nanoest end of physics, they were also sitting there with space and energy. And at the most evolved ladder of the curve, the human mind also, you were left with energy. And that's when Fritjof Capra's Tao of Physics became such a cult. Because he said, we don't get it, but really the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Zen, the philosophies have got it in their own ways.
Yeah.
Right? And again, the way the book starts is so fascinating, where Fritjof Capra talks about how he's sitting there by the beach. And just sitting there by the beach, he had this moment where he saw the cosmic dance. He said nothing was moving. But he said that he experienced a state in which he could see the sand move, the water move, the particles dance, all of that. Now, of course, for Capra, it was a revelation.
Yeah.
But if you actually study our texts, this is what the alpha state of meditation does to you. It plugs you in with the universe.
Okay.
So Capra talks about how the wave-particle duality is explained by the Sankhya philosophy. He talks about how the movement of the cosmos and the cosmic particle is actually the structure that is explained in Shiva's Tandava.
Right.
He talks about how relativity is explained through the concept of Kala Chakra, the Buddhist Kala Chakra. So the circle of time and the concept of relativity are actually pretty much the same, where time is a circle.
Right.
Yeah.
He speaks about how the atomic particle structure can be decoded through the I Ching, which is the yin-yang
of the
and
Chinese.
the dots and the dashes around it.
Okay.
Right. So why this was a cult book is because this was the first time that Western science was okay to derive its inspiration from Eastern philosophies, or thought that the problem was not about us running like headless chicken hunting for something, but that of interpreting it right.
Right.
And you know why it's fascinating? It's fascinating because I have this friend and I work very closely with him, and he's a string theorist, so growth scholar from Oxford, teaches at Oxford.
Nice.
Has worked at string. And he's recently joined the Alan Turing Institute of AI and Deep Learning. And I asked him, I said, what's a string theorist doing at an AI institute? And he said, Eika, what's happened is that in string theory, we've actually hit the end of our tether as far as mathematical expression is concerned. So we've run out of math to do string any longer. So what's happening is an exodus of string theorists into two directions. The one direction they're going through is they are saying, boss, somebody's cracked it. So they're going into ancient philosophies. They're going into the Hermetic principles of ancient Egypt, the way with the concept, the concept of the Ruta and the Runa, the whole idea of the Darshan and what the Shastra meant, into Latin and Greek. He's saying, boss, the past has cracked it somewhere. So we'll go down the philosophy path. And the other set of string theorists, having reached their end of the tether in math, are actually going into AI. Because when we've done AI, we've actually bypassed math. We built out AI basically on logic and on networks. Now when you go back and read the Tao of Physics, it's like this epiphanes click in place and the penny drops and you're like,
oh my God, I missed.
All right then.
Did I miss it for so long, kind of?
So you have explained this beautifully, but tell me if, a reader just reads this book, they're going to be able, is it an easy read, do you think?
Okay.
Who would you recommend?
So if you know your physics, if you know your physics reasonably well, then this is a very preliminary introduction to the Eastern philosophies, be it Hinduism, Taoism, Zen, Buddhism. And if you know your philosophies, then this is a brilliant way to get to know your physics better. But
oh wow,
if
that's
you
nice.
don't know either, find out
start
some
with one.
Yeah,
then you get to the book. Yeah, great.
But it's not a very difficult read. Of course, there's a lot of physics in it. But it's not a difficult read. It's not a breezy read for sure. But it's not a difficult read. It's still easier to read this than to read the Vedas.
Oh, yeah,
but it's great that, this book has, so now you've reached a point where you feel like, yes, I know it all about quantum physics. That's
No, this was the start of journey into quantum physics. Quantum came after this.
Yeah.
See, this book was written in 1972.
Okay.
Right? 72 is when quantum was just beginning to happen.
Right.
So in fact, in subsequent editions, he's actually added a chapter on the new physics.
Okay.
So remember, 1972 is the time where US had just landed a man on the moon.
Yeah.
The fascination was with empirical physics. What we understand, everything that our range of humans can sense.
Right.
Yeah.
There was no world beyond that.
Yeah.
So the last 30-40 years of physics have actually been about
Going
empirical
down to
physics
the-
and not theoretical physics.
Beyond the atomic level as well, right?
So Einstein's world, by the way, was the world of theoretical physics.
Right.
So even with Einstein, think about it. Einstein gave the formula for the gravitation wave 100 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
We didn't believe it because we didn't have machines to test it.
To test it and figure out if it's real.
So 2 years ago is when we finally have empirical evidence of the gravitation wave. So we now say Einstein was right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in very many ways, physics today is actually playing catch up to Capra and to theoretical physics and the Tao.
Right. So it's very interesting because a lot of German physicists learned Sanskrit as so Einstein, I think, was one who
Oppenheimer after the bomb.
So it comes back to something that we spoke about in the first half, that we don't understand it well enough kind of to make the right
choices,
learning from, say, even the Rig Vedas or whatever.
So that's what I'm hoping, Satyajit, is the purpose of the rest of my life.
Right.
That's what, like I was saying, we've been attempting to do.
Right.
With projects like 52 Red Pills, with the Mythopia. There used to be a radio series I used to run called The Uncommon Sense. And you will see, but there is a rising consciousness, so you will see a lot of this going out.
I do hear this a lot, that there is a lot of people getting enlightened with a new wave of consciousness. A lot of my friends as well have been talking about it. There's a lot of Facebook videos that keep coming at you, right? And so, of course, sounds very exciting. I think this may be a great book for people who kind of don't believe in something like this, to maybe start a better understanding.
Who speak the religion of science, let me put it like that.
Right, who speak the religion of science, and maybe they can experience and
understand religion through science.
Through science, fantastic. Great.
That's interesting.
So the next book, and this is the last book that we're going to talk about, is Land of the Seven Rivers.
Yes.
Land of the Seven Rivers by Sanjeev Sanyal. So, of course, Land of the Seven Rivers speaks about India. And tell us a little bit about this book, Eika.
Before I tell you about the book, translate 7 rivers for me.
Sapta Sindhu.
Well done.
Thank you.
So, where do you think the word Hindu came from? So, how did the word Hindu happen?
Hindu, I'm not sure.
So, interestingly, what's common across Vivekananda, Man's Search, Tao of Physics, all the Veda, Purana, everything, is that there's no word of the word Hindu, by the way. There's no mention of the word Hindu. It was not called Hindu, it was a way of life. It wasn't a religion at all. It was the Sanatan Dharma.
Right, okay.
Right, it was the forever truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So, the word Hindu came because when the Persians came upon this fabulous land of 7 rivers, the Sapta Sindhu, they didn't have Sa in their alphabet at all. The Sa was the Ha.
Oh,
so we became Hapta Hindu.
Oh.
And from Hapta Hindu
Hindu
came the Hindus,
nice.
and came Hindustan, and came Hinduism. So all of it, which finds absolutely no origin in its original texts at all.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
It's basically an error.
So that's the origin of Hindu as a word by itself. So Land of 7 Rivers is actually I love the book. It's a fabulous guide. Kunji कहते हैं ना जिसको to India's history traced through its geography.
Okay.
See, these are all interconnected books. Religion through science, history through geography.
You get it. See, religion through science, life through yoga.
Life through yoga.
Feeling very connected.
So why I love this is it's brilliant. In fact, I've picked up Land of 7 Rivers, but even if you look at Sanyal's other books, so the book that predates this is a book called The History of Indian Renaissance, which traces the economic histories of India and China over the last 5,000 years.
Okay.
7 Rivers traces India's history through its geography, and it starts with geography like Paleolithic era, the Indian plate coming and
right from formation times.
China, the formation of the Himalayas. Why the Himalayas are therefore such exciting mountains? Because they have the element of the sea and the salt and the spice of the oceans, and they have the stillness of the mountains. And then, of course, he traces it down to formation of life, the Indus Valley civilization, the Harappan civilization, Lothal. He also talks a lot about the entire Deccan history, which largely in our history books, for whatever reasons, has not been covered at all.
Right.
So that's what this book is about. This book is then followed by a book called The Ocean of Churn.
Okay.
So the Ocean of Churn extends the same analysis or the same description to why the Indian Ocean is called the Indian Ocean.
Okay. Why?
Think about
why
that. That's really the only ocean that is named after a country.
Right.
Guess why? Wild guess.
Why?
Because all the countries on the rim of the Indian Ocean were ruled by India. So there were Indian tribes, Indian men. That's how you have Hinduism in Indonesia.
Right.
That's how you have the Thai king being called the Ramas.
The Ramas, yeah.
And the Thai capital, the ancient Thai capital is, guess what? It's called Ayodhya.
Oh.
It's called Ayodhya.
Yeah. It's about an hour and a half drive from Bangkok.
Okay. Wow.
So all these countries.
So this book has a lot of interesting facts, right?
And it's very well written.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's very, very well written.
Apparently, in the book, they say that dark-skinned people were valued way more than fairer-skinned people in the Hindu mythology earlier. So
because we didn't have the concept of
fair and lovely. Sorry, I couldn't resist that.
I must in fact tell you that in Sri Lanka, the concept of beauty is not fairness.
Okay.
The concept is the concept of glow.
Right.
Okay.
So the golden glow.
Okay.
So and there's a term for it. It's called Pajapaha.
Okay.
Yeah, Pahapat. So Pahapat is the golden glow, which is far more valuable than fair skin.
Okay.
So and this book actually debunks, rightly as Racheta said, the whole myth of fair skinned people and how
being
brilliant
beautiful and you can see beauty in.
Correct. And then it traces it down, traces how our beliefs changed, cultures changed, how we became such a heterogeneous population today. See, today if I ask you what's your racial identity?
Mine?
Yeah.
I'm like a complete mix.
See? And this is our reality.
Mumbai, I would say. Like, I couldn't relate it to, like...
Yeah, you can't relate it to a race at all. You might... Yeah. In fact, I don't even think you can relate it to a place.
Yeah.
And it's fabulously written. I think it's a must for anybody who wants to know anything about how India came about. For the last 6 years that it's been in publication, I've gifted this book to every Indian and every foreigner I know. In fact, when you want to know about India and Indian philosophy and the Vedanta, even before you get into there, this is your mandatory guidebook. In fact, Sanjeev and I are also great friends, and I always tell him that I should, get the award for just selling
promotional brand ambassador.
Absolutely.
No, I think that's the effect that books really have on you. That when you really like a book, you really want to pass on the knowledge. So similarly, I think we all have books that we've been gifting to people. Yeah. So great.
So, it's very interesting that you say that. So the two prime publishers, or the 3 prime publishers in the whole space of the Vedic wisdom space. So there's Motilal Banarsidas, there's Gita Press Gorakhpur, and there's Writers Workshop, which is Dr. P.N. Lal's publishing house based out of Calcutta.
Okay.
So they've actually now reached out to us, to our whole community of Mythopia, to say that, would you like to be our stockists? Because you seem to be the ones
selling
the highest amount of ordering of these books.
Yeah, keep them.
Ab distributorship le lo. Great, yeah. It's great to see that, great to hear that you've been gifting books. And for us, reading has been like the core of our business. The Open Library project is something that means so much to us dearly, and we love doing this podcast for this very reason, because we get to meet people like you, and this conversation itself, I'm going to find myself thinking about it over the next few days, really considering philosophies and the things that we spoke about, because again, I'm at an age now where I'm kind of getting interested in philosophy and the consciousness of everything and how things work.
We won't discuss age here at all. I'm polite with 2 ladies. But honestly, the project that you're doing with the Open Library is really commendable.
Thank you
so much. Thank you so much.
The way the ease and convenience with which it reaches knowledge to the masses is really commendable. So good job, guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Eika Chaturvedi Banerjee, for being on the show today and sharing your insights on these books. We definitely look forward to having you on the show again to discuss Rig Vedas in terms of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. So we're going to do that episode, I don't know when, but we'll do it. And a big thank you to all our listeners. You can follow the Open Library project on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook for latest updates on our events, and stay tuned for the next Paperback podcast on IVM Podcasts. Happy reading. You can follow IVM Podcast on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at IVM Podcasts. Listen to Paperback on the IVM Podcast app, website or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Advertising is dead. Yep, you heard me right. Advertising is dead. We're all in the content business now. Let's not call it news, TV, radio, etc., etc. It's all content, and we're in the middle of this weirdly exciting phase where all the borders and lines that have been drawn over decades has been swept away by this lovely thing called the internet. We're a show where we don't dwell on just the stuff that is now, but rather the wider stuff about advertising, media, content, and the whole goddamn circus surrounding it. Tune in every Tuesday for our weekly unboxing of the mystery box we used to call advertising. I'm Varun Dugirala, co-founder and content chief at The Glitch, and this is my new podcast, Advertising is Dead.
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Meghnad, do you know how to citizen?
Hey Shreyas, let's just do a podcast about it.
Let's do a podcast about it. A podcast is called How to Citizen. In every episode, we get a new guest and discuss one chapter from the 8th grade civics textbook. think about it as three friends revising before a test, and we go back to school. There's nostalgia, there's trauma, there are lunch breaks, there are favorite teachers, there are horrible teachers, there's everything.
So every Tuesday we bring in a guest on the podcast and we ask them a very simple question. Do you know how to citizen?
Meghnath, I think the question is, do you know how to citizen?
But Shreyas, I'm asking you this question. Do